The vast, cold chamber of the Galactic Council felt like a cathedral to the void, a place where judgment was passed on species whose very existence hung in the balance. A heavy silence settled over the room, broken only by the soft hum of the translation devices embedded in the walls, converting the alien tongues into something the humans could understand. Admiral Jake Morrison stood alone at the center, his uniform pressed and his medals gleaming in the artificial light. But no matter how many accolades he wore, none of them mattered here. This room, filled with alien eyes, regarded humanity not with respect, but with fear and disdain. It felt like standing before an inescapable judgment, with every word, every movement, carrying the weight of 1,000 lives. At the highest point in the chamber, the Zephyrian ambassador sat upon a crystalline throne. The creature's body shimmered like fractured glass, veins of light running through its transparent form. When it spoke, the sound was a wind chime melody fused with the low rumble of thunder. It was a voice that commanded attention, and it carried with it the weight of history. Admiral Morrison of the species called humans, you stand accused of crimes against galactic peace and order. Jake stood tall, his pulse steady but his mind racing. His resolve was ironclad, forged in the fires of countless battles. Yet today, this was no simple fight. This was humanity's future being decided, and he had to carry that burden alone. We, the Galactic Council, the Zephyrian continued, accuse humanity of rampant expansionism. In the mere 300 years since your first contact with galactic society, you have claimed 47 worlds, a number that no other species has dared to approach in millennia. The Zephyrian's eyes flickered with a cold light. Your species lacks restraint. You terraform barren worlds instead of working within the established system. You maintain military fleets when peace has prevailed for centuries. You ignore the very essence of our galactic protocols, spreading chaos where stability should reign. A murmur rippled through the council, as members from species as diverse as the towering stone-like agromoths to the ethereal, almost ghostly umbrans exchanged glances. Each accusation felt like a blow, not just to humanity, but to Jake's very core. The weight of the words pressed against him, and though his chest tightened, he did not waver. We terraform dead worlds that nobody else wants, Jake responded, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the murmurs. We take places that have no life and give them a future. We do what others dare not. We bring prosperity, not chaos. Our colonies trade fairly. They offer growth where there was none. And our military, yes, our military is there to protect us from pirates and raiders that your peace treaties failed to stop. Another voice, this one a strange hybrid of insectoid and reptilian, hissed from the back of the chamber. Human ideas spread like a virus. It spat. They disrupt the traditional ways of our societies. They breed unrest among our youth. They spread ideas of individualism and limitless growth. You reject the old ways, the ways that have held our civilization stable for millennia. Jake's jaw tightened. The Council's accusation wasn't just about their actions. It was about humanity's very essence. About what they stood for: growth, progress, defiance. Perhaps it's time to question whether your stability is worth clinging to, Jake replied, his voice a little sharper now. Maybe it's time to look beyond ancient ways that have stagnated entire civilizations. Maybe it's time to see that growth and progress aren't dangers, they are the future. His words echoed through the chamber, but instead of the expected applause or even acceptance, the room grew colder. The eyes of the council turned from wary to disgusted, as if his defiance had confirmed their worst fears. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. The Zephyrian ambassador raised a shimmering arm, and the room fell silent. You are a species of youth, Admiral Morrison, one that does not respect the ancient wisdom we have accumulated over millennia. You rush forward without understanding the consequences of your actions. Perhaps the galaxy has been too lenient with you. The vote has been cast. The council members began to raise their arms, their hands glowing with the light of the vote. One by one, the votes for humanity's exile came in, the lights flashing bright green as the decision was made. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. Each vote a nail in humanity's coffin. 847 species voted for humanity's exile. 12 abstained. Only 3 voted to allow humanity to remain. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. His mind went numb for a moment. He wanted to lash out, to scream, to force the council to listen. But he knew better. This wasn't a battle he could win through force. He had to accept it. He stood, his body rigid with the weight of the decision. His gaze moved across the chamber, locking eyes with every alien leader. They all seemed to look at him the same way, as if humanity was a child to be sent to its room for misbehaving. But Jake knew something they didn't. Humanity had never been just a child. They had always been more than that. They were survivors. As the vote passed, Jake made a silent vow to himself. Humanity would not beg for readmission. They would not cower or plead for mercy. Instead, they would rise from this exile and prove the galaxy wrong. They would build something the council could never have imagined. A new future shaped on their own terms. "Thank you, Admiral Morrison." The Zephyrian's voice broke through the silence. "You may leave now. The decision is final." Jake turned and walked away, but inside, a fire burned brighter than ever. Humanity wasn't finished, not by a long shot. They were just getting started. As the doors closed behind him, he whispered under his breath, "We'll show them." Asterisk, the news of humanities. Exile spread faster than any galactic communication system could handle. Across the stars, it was broadcast on every frequency, every channel, and in every language. Humanity has been voted out, banishment from the Galactic Council. And as the words reverberated through the deep reaches of space, a somber and uneasy stillness settled over the worlds that called Earth home. Back on Earth, President Linda Carter stood in the Oval Office, staring out the wide windows at the skyline of Washington. The steady hum of the city below contrasted sharply with the cold silence inside the room. For a moment, she let the weight of the decision wash over her. Humanity had been cast aside by the very people they had once tried to befriend. Their very existence had been deemed a threat to galactic peace, but she was not one to wallow in the consequences of a decision made by others. No, she had more important things to focus on. Humanity would not bow to exile. Not now, not ever. The door opened and Admiral Jake Morrison stepped in, his boots making a soft thud on the polished floor. He had removed his medals, but the look in his eyes was still that of a seasoned leader, grizzled, tired, but unbroken. His hands were clenched tightly in fists at his sides, as if holding back the storm raging inside him. "Jake," Carter said softly, turning from the window, "I know it's not what you wanted, but we have to face it now." Jake didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. He already knew what was coming next. Carter's eyes narrowed. "We've been cast out. 847 species voted for our exile. 12 abstained, and only 3 had the courage to stand by us." Her voice carried no trace of weakness, only the steel that had gotten her into office in the first place. "But we don't get to sit here and let them think we're defeated. We can't. I won't let humanity be reduced to a forgotten footnote in this galaxy." Jake nodded. He knew what that meant. "We're going to move forward," Carter continued, her voice firm. "We have 60 days to recall all humans in galactic space. After that, no human ship will be allowed in the civilized sectors. But we are not backing down, Jake. We're going to show them what we're capable of." There was no longer a trace of defeat in Jake's eyes. He had heard those words before, many times, when he was on the front lines of battles. "I've already got a plan," he said quietly. "We'll head beyond the rim." "The rim?" Carter repeated. A slight arch to her brow. Jake met her gaze, his eyes locked onto hers with determination. "Beyond the galactic borders. It's the last frontier. The Council thinks we'll be crushed out there. They think we're nothing more than parasites, but we know better. We know what we can build, and we know what we can survive." Carter smiled, her mind working through the implications of the plan. There was no fear in her, just the cold certainty that humanity would rise. "I'll contact the colonies. Every single one of them. We have to move fast." Within hours, every human colony across galactic space was put on notice. The order came down: prepare for immediate departure. Prepare for the unknown. They would leave the civilized galaxy behind, taking nothing but what they could carry with them. Hundreds of thousands of humans, families, scientists, military personnel, and every willing soul who had ever believed. In the dream of expansion, that at the heart of the operation, was the Intrepid, an aging vessel now refitted to carry humanity's best and brightest beyond the rim. 100 ships, each designed for survival, would break through the edge of known space and head toward the Kepler 442 system, one of the few planets untouched by galactic bureaucracy. But the unknown wasn't just space. It was what lay ahead. Hostile environments, unpredictable cosmic phenomena, and perhaps the greatest challenge yet, other alien species who would not hesitate to exploit a fractured humanity. The first few weeks were a blur of activity. People worked day and night to prepare. Ships were packed with supplies, resources, and equipment that would enable them to survive in the harshest environments. Earth's remaining fleet, a mixture of old warships and civilian vessels, was hastily retrofitted for combat. It didn't matter that the galaxy had turned its back on them. Humanity would not falter. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Intrepid, watching as the ships were prepared for their journey. The gravity of the moment settled over him like a weight. He could feel the nervous energy in the air, the buzz of human resolve. "It's time," he muttered under his breath. Beside him, Captain Ben Rodriguez of the Resolute, one of the veteran commanders chosen to lead the Exodus, stepped up. "Ready for this, Admiral?" Jake didn't look at him, but his voice was steady. "We're not just leaving, Ben. We're building. We're going to show the Council what we're made of. When they look back, they'll see something they never expected." Rodriguez gave a sharp nod. "And we'll give them something they won't ever forget." As the countdown to launch began, Jake's mind flashed back to the Galactic Council's vote. The faces of the ambassadors, each one staring down at humanity with contempt. The Zifrian's crystal-like form pulsing as it passed judgment. He could still hear the hum of the Council's chamber, the cold, calculated words as they decided humanity's fate. Exile. He could still feel the sting of the verdict. But that sting wasn't anger anymore. It was a flame that would drive humanity further than any of the Council's narrow minds could fathom. They had underestimated humanity's resolve. They had thought exile would break them. But now, as the ships prepared to leave Earth's orbit, as the engines hummed to life, Jake knew this wasn't an end. It was a beginning. A few days later, as the Intrepid and its fleet of ships began their journey beyond the rim, Jake stood at the observation window, watching the stars blur into a streak of light as they warped away from the known galaxy. The familiar constellations, once a symbol of humanity's home, faded into the distance. The unknown stretched before them, vast and dangerous. But for the first time in a long while, Jake felt something he hadn't in years. Freedom. Humanity was no longer bound by the rules of the Galactic Council, no longer tied to the constraints they had been given. They were alone, but they were also limitless. They would build their future from nothing, without permission, without apologies. And as the fleet surged toward the edge of known space, Jake made a vow. "We will show them," he whispered to the stars. "We will show them why humanity was never meant to be contained." The journey beyond the rim had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The journey beyond the rim was not one that most galactic species would have attempted. While the council members considered the rim a wasteland too chaotic, too dangerous, too hostile, humanity saw something different: opportunity. It was a challenge, an untamed expanse where the rules of civilization did not apply, where survival was not guaranteed, but would be earned through sheer willpower and ingenuity. The first few weeks of their journey were filled with the hum of uncertainty as the Intrepid and the other ships in the fleet sailed through the unknown. But behind the haze of fear and excitement, there was something deeper and unshakable resolve. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Intrepid, staring out at the void ahead. The stars had started to blur as they passed the known edges of the galaxy, leaving behind everything that had once been familiar. The farther they traveled, the more the sensation of isolation grew. The council was behind them, but the unknown was ahead. No maps, no guides, no guarantees. "Everything looks clear for now," Captain Ben Rodriguez said, his voice cutting through the silence. "We're heading into uncharted territory. We should be able to reach Kepler 442 within 2 weeks if the engines hold up." Jake nodded without looking away from the viewport. The fleet was spread out across the vast blackness, the ships gliding smoothly through space, each one carrying its own hopes and dreams, its own risks. There were no guarantees for anyone here. Even the most advanced technology could break under the strain of the unknown. But there was no turning back now. For better or worse, humanity had been cast out, and they were making their own path. As the days passed, the sense of isolation only deepened. The vastness of space became a heavy blanket that seemed to press in on them, cutting them off from everything they had ever known. The ships moved in sync, but without any clear direction from the galaxy they once called home. And that void, the one that stretched endlessly before them, began to feel alive. It was more than just empty space. It was a challenge, an adversary that watched and waited for their mistakes. "We've been hearing reports of unusual gravitational anomalies in the sector ahead." Dr. Amy Sullivan's voice crackled over the comms, breaking Jake's trance. "They're not on the charts, and the scanners can't quite make sense of them. It's like the laws of physics are warped." Jake's brow furrowed as he turned to face her. "How severe are these anomalies?" "Hard to say," Amy responded, her voice cool but edged with concern. "We're working on some recalibrations, but I wouldn't put it past the unknown to throw a curveball. Be ready for anything." Jake's instincts flared. He had led fleets through countless battles, facing pirates, raiders, and alien forces that wanted nothing more than to wipe humanity from the galaxy. But this was different. There were no known enemies, no fleet to fight, just a hostile, uncharted wilderness. And in this place, anything could happen. "Understood," Jake replied. "Keep me posted on any changes." As the fleet ventured deeper, the first signs of the anomalies became apparent. Subtle at first, they were disturbances in the ship's course, small deviations that no one had expected. They passed through areas where the fabric of space seemed to stretch and buckle, and the familiar hum of the ship's engines began to fluctuate. Jake could feel the tension rise, a palpable weight in the air. "Admiral," the comms officer's voice interrupted his thoughts. "We've got a situation on the Resolute." Jake's pulse quickened as he stepped forward. "What happened?" "The Resolute is encountering gravitational fluctuations that are throwing off their navigation systems." They're being pulled toward a dense nebula. Something's pulling them in, and they can't break free. It's like the gravitational force is too strong for their engines to compensate. Jake's heart raced. The fleet was fragile. Every ship depended on its crew, its engines, its systems. But in the unknown, nothing was guaranteed. And if the Resolute couldn't break free, it could drag the entire fleet into something far worse. "We've got to get to them now," Jake said, his voice sharp. "Ben, take the Intrepid and get us to the Resolute ASAP. Full thrust." Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "Aye, Admiral." "All ships fall in behind us?" The fleet surged forward, but as they approached the Resolute, the strange anomalies began to grow stronger. The Intrepid's shields flickered as the gravitational forces twisted space around them. It was as if the very fabric of reality was bending, warping, forcing them toward the nebula. "Engines at maximum." Rodriguez barked, but his words were drowned out by the rising hum of the ship's systems struggling to maintain their trajectory. The nebula loomed ahead, a swirling mass of gas and radiation that had the potential to destroy them all. Jake's mind raced as he studied the data coming in from the Resolute. Their engines were failing, and the anomaly seemed to be pulling them in faster. In a moment of clarity, Jake realized the nebula wasn't the only threat. The gravitational anomalies had to be linked to something else, something larger and far more dangerous. Something was manipulating space itself. "All ships, brace yourselves," Jake shouted, his voice commanding. "We're not just dealing with a nebula. This isn't natural." He didn't wait for confirmation. "Rodriguez, get us in there. If we can't pull them out manually, we're going to need to override their systems before they're lost. I'm not going to let this happen." With a mighty roar, the Intrepid surged forward, pulling the rest of the fleet in a tight formation. They cut through the tumultuous waves of space, fighting against the gravitational pull that seemed to stretch and snap at them. The Resolute was ahead, just barely clinging to the last shreds of its flight system's dot. As they neared, Jake's worst fears were confirmed. The gravitational anomalies were not just random. They were intelligent, as if something was guiding them, shaping them into a trap. The Resolute was caught in a web, and the more they struggled, the tighter the strands pulled. "Admiral," the comms officer's voice trembled, "we're getting interference. It's like something is ... reaching out." Suddenly, the entire fleet shuddered as a massive pulse of energy shot out from the nebula, rippling through space like a shockwave. The pulse struck the Intrepid, and the ship's systems flickered, throwing the crew into darkness for a split second. Then, as the lights came back on, a single, haunting voice crackled through the comms. "We've been waiting for you." Jake's blood ran cold. This wasn't just space. This wasn't just a random anomaly. Whatever had manipulated the gravitational forces was alive, and now it had found humanity. The battle for their survival was only just beginning. The pulse of energy that had reverberated through space was more than a mere wave of distortion. It was a warning. As the shockwave passed, the Intrepid and the rest of the fleet were shaken to their core. But it wasn't just the physical impact that rattled them. It was the sense of being watched. The sense that they weren't alone in the deep, empty void beyond the rim. Something had found them. Something ancient. Something powerful. The voice on the comms was chilling in its clarity, carrying with it an undercurrent of malevolence. "We've been waiting for you." Jake Morrison stood rigidly on the bridge, his eyes scanning the data streams that were flashing across the monitors in front of him. The gravity waves were intensifying again, pulling the fleet into the heart of the unknown anomaly. The Resolute had been pulled further into the nebula, its systems barely functioning. The ship was already taking on damage, its hull groaning under the stress. Jake could see it all: the distorted readings, the flickering screens, the escalating chaos. This wasn't just space. This wasn't just an anomaly in the fabric of reality. Dot, it was a trap. N, full reverse. Get us out of here. Jake barked, his voice sharp with urgency. But even as the Intrepid reversed, the gravitational forces grew stronger. The space around them was beginning to warp, bending and twisting as though the laws of physics themselves were no longer in control. The fleet struggled to maintain its course, but the more they fought, the more they were drawn in. This isn't just a natural phenomenon, Jake muttered to himself. It's been set up. Whoever, whatever did, this is manipulating us. They've been waiting for us to come, to make this mistake. The Intrepid's engines roared, but it wasn't enough. The pull was too strong. The nebula that loomed ahead was not just a cloud of gas and radiation. It was a maze, a labyrinth of spatial anomalies, each more dangerous than the last. Admiral, Amy Sullivan's voice crackled through the comms. I think I've figured it out. The gravitational anomalies are artificial. They're being generated by something outside our systems. There's a source, and it's using the nebula as a trap. Jake's heart skipped a beat. A source? Where? I don't know. Amy's voice trembled. But I'm tracking something massive just beyond the nebula's core. It's like it's a ship, but it's unlike anything we've ever seen before. It's creating the gravitational disturbances. And if we don't break free now, we're going to be pulled straight into it. Can we fight it? Jake demanded. It's not just a ship, Amy replied, her voice tight with anxiety. It's a weapon. We've never seen anything like it before. It's using dark energy to manipulate the fabric of space itself. If we don't get out of here, it's not just the fleet we'll lose. We'll lose everything. Jake stood frozen, for a moment, absorbing the gravity of her words. The galaxy, as vast and intimidating as it was, had always been manageable. The Galactic Council, the pirates, the raiders, they were all challenges that humanity had faced and overcome. But this was something different. This was something ancient, something that could bend space and time to its will. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival against a force. They were fighting for the right to exist in a galaxy that had just shown them how fragile their place in the universe was. Ben! Jake snapped, his hands clenching at his sides. We need a plan now. Every ship, take evasive action. Full throttle to the edges of the anomaly. We're not waiting to be pulled into whatever that thing is. The fleet responded with precision, but the gravitational forces were relentless. The nebula seemed to close in around them, dark tendrils of energy reaching out, pulling at there. Ships like the fingers of a giant. It was as if the entire galaxy had turned its back on them. Suddenly, a bright flash of light erupted from the heart of the nebula, followed by a deep, resonant hum that rattled the Intrepid's hull. A massive circular structure appeared from the darkness, its surface shimmering with dark energy that seemed to warp and distort space around it. It was a ship or something that looked like one, but it was more than that. It was an anomaly, a creation that had no place in the galaxy, no place in the universe. That's it, Amy whispered, her voice full of disbelief. That's the source. Jake's eyes locked on the massive vessel, a cold realization settling over him. It's a weapon, he murmured. A weapon designed to manipulate gravity and space. Itself. And it's been waiting for us. The structure loomed in the distance. Its sheer size dwarfed everything around it. The ships of the fleet felt like insects, their movements insignificant against the colossal presence of the weapon. Every calculation, every plan they had made seemed useless in the face of this force. We have to stop it, Jake said, his voice low and determined. We can't let them have control of this power. It's not just a weapon. It's a message. They're trying to show us that they're the ones in charge. Suddenly, the weapon flared to life. Beams of dark energy shot out from its core, streaking across space toward the Intrepid and the fleet. The shields flickered, the impact shaking the entire ship. Shields down to 30%. The officer on the bridge shouted, "We won't last long under this kind of fire." Jake's mind raced. Evasive maneuvers. Keep us moving, don't let them lock onto us. Ben, get us to that structure. We can't. Fight it from here. Ben hesitated for a split second. Admiral, it's too dangerous. If we get too close, I know the risks, Jake interrupted, his voice steel. But if we don't act now, we'll be dead before we even realize it. The fleet surged forward, moving at breakneck speed toward the massive weapon. As they closed in, Jake could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Every life in the fleet was now in his hands. If they failed, humanity would be obliterated, not by an enemy fleet, but by a force so powerful that nothing could stand against it. The weapon's beams shot out again, tearing through space and slamming into the hulls of the approaching ships. The Resolute took a direct hit, its shields collapsing under the force. Sparks and fire erupted across the bridge, and for a moment, Jake feared the worst. "Keep fighting," Jake shouted. "We're not backing down." He stared ahead at the massive structure, its core glowing with power, preparing for another strike. They were nearly there. But in the back of his mind, Jake knew that they were running out of time, and if they couldn't stop this weapon, humanity's story would end in the cold, forgotten darkness of space. The fate of the galaxy and their future was hanging by. A thread asterisk. The massive weapon, the ship, the anomaly loomed ahead, its dark energy pulses rippling through space like the beat of a cosmic heart. Every ship in the fleet strained against the gravitational forces as they closed in, and the crew of the Intrepid fought desperately to maintain control, every second pushing them closer to the event horizon of a fate they could no longer escape. Jake. Morrison stood at the helm, his knuckles white as he gripped the command chair. The intense hum of the ship's engines reverberated through the walls, a sharp contrast to the eerie silence that filled the command center. Every light, every system seemed to be working overtime, thrumming in the face of the impossible odds. They faced. The weapon was out there, its dark form twisting in the distance, pulsing like the center of a storm. They were running out of time. "Admiral!" Amy Sullivan's voice crackled through the comms. "We've detected something else, something massive, coming from the heart of the anomaly." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, Amy? What are we facing?" "It's not just the weapon," she replied, voice strained with urgency. "It's like they're amplifying the gravity. It's pulling in ships, pulling in everything. If we don't act now, we'll be trapped. We're already being pulled toward the center of it. This anomaly, it's a gravity well, but not a natural one. Someone is engineering it." Jake cursed under his breath. "Keep tracking it. We need to find a way to shut it down before it's too late." The warning lights on the ship began to flash, their insistent beeping cutting through the air like a pulse. The Intrepid shook violently, the hull groaning under the pressure as the gravitational forces increased. The fleet had already been battered by several direct hits from the dark energy beams, and now, with the sudden increase in pull, every ship was struggling to stay in formation. The pull of the anomaly was starting to overwhelm their thrusters. "We're losing control." The navigation officer shouted, "We can't fight it much longer." Jake's gaze snapped to the viewport, where the dark structure of the weapon loomed ever closer, its surface crackling with dark energy. It was impossible to ignore the sense of dread that washed over him as the monstrous thing came into focus. But beneath that dread was a cold, unshakable resolve. Humanity had been cast aside, left to fend for itself in the harshest reaches of space. But they were still here. They were still fighting. "Ben!" Jake shouted. "Get us closer to that weapon." We need to get in close, disrupt its core. If we can't destroy it, we can at least destabilize it. We can't let it control the gravity of this entire system. Ben Rodriguez's voice came back over the comms, steady despite the chaos. Understood, Admiral. We'll close in, but we need to stay mobile. If we stop moving for even a moment, we're done for. As they surged forward, the gravitational forces felt like hands closing around their ships, pulling them into the maw of the anomaly. The Intrepid felt as if it were floating in the grip of a living entity, the very fabric of space distorting. Around them, the ship groaned as its systems fought against the pull, and outside, the stars blurred into streaks of light, stretched and bent by the immense forces. Engage every system we have, Jake barked. Give me everything. Push the engines. Beyond their limits if you have to. We can't let this thing win. The crew worked in perfect synchronicity, coordinating to keep the ship from being pulled apart. But Jake could feel the pressure mounting. The longer they stayed in the center of the anomaly, the more everything began to warp time, space, and even light itself. The very laws of reality were bending before them. That the Intrepid came within firing range of the dark weapon, its core glowing a sickly hue. A crackling energy field surrounded the massive structure, its surface covered in jagged lines that pulsed with power. Amy, how do we disable it? Jake demanded, gripping the console tightly. Amy's voice came through, focused but strained. It's feeding off the energy from the core of the nebula, amplifying it with some kind of device we've never seen before. It's using the gravitational distortion to power itself, and I'm willing to bet it's drawing energy from the very fabric of the galaxy itself. If we can target the energy conduits, we might be able to destabilize the entire system. Jake's gaze shifted toward the viewport again, where the weapon stretched before them, the massive glowing core at its heart pulsing like a dying star. Get me a targeting solution, Jake ordered. Ben, move us into position. We only have one shot at this. The battle to maintain control over the Intrepid was becoming a frantic, heart-pounding struggle. They were being pulled in by the gravity well, but with a mixture of sheer determination and raw force, Ben maneuvered the ship closer, to the heart of the anomaly, aiming directly at the dark structure. Every ship in the fleet followed suit, fighting to maintain their formation, to keep their distance while closing in on their target. Ready for a strike, Amy's voice came through again, sharp with focus. We've got the energy conduits in sight. We can fire, but we need to do it now before we're completely overwhelmed by the pull. Jake gritted his teeth. They were too close. If they fired and missed, the repercussions could be catastrophic. But they didn't have time to hesitate. Do it, Jake commanded. We're going to make this count. The weapon fired again, its beams streaking through space, slicing across the Intrepid's shields. The entire ship shuddered as the shields absorbed the energy, but they held, barely. Ben pushed the engines to their breaking point, and the ship lurched forward with a sharp jolt as the weapons on board the Intrepid came online. Firing now, Amy shouted. A beam of pure, concentrated energy surged from the heart of the Intrepid, streaking across the void toward the dark weapon. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. The beam hit the weapon's core, and a violent shockwave erupted outward, shaking the entire fleet. The dark structure writhed as the energy blast cracked through its surface. Then, a pulse of energy, so bright it blinded them all, erupted from the weapon. It sent a shockwave that slammed through space, shaking the very fabric of reality itself. But they had done it. The weapon's core flickered, its energy conduits short-circuiting. The gravitational anomaly it had been generating began to destabilize. The pull on the fleet slackened, and for the first time since entering the nebula, the ships were able to break free. The forces that had been tearing at them slowly began to fade the weapon weakening, its grip on space itself loosening. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had survived, but as they pulled away, victorious but battered, Jake's eyes never left the broken weapon. There was no time for celebration. The galaxy was full of threats, seen and unseen, and now humanity had just made an enemy far older, far more dangerous than anything they had ever faced. And the true battle humanity's future was just beginning. Asterisk. The aftermath of their victory over the dark weapon was a momentary reprieve in the grand scheme of their survival. The Intrepid and the rest of the fleet pulled away from the shattered remains of the weapon, the space around them clearing as the gravitational anomalies finally dissipated. But even as they fought to regain control, the silence that settled over the fleet felt uneasy, as though the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Waiting for the next shoe to drop. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, his mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded. The fleet had survived the pull of the weapon, and they had destroyed it, but at what cost? The ships were battered, their systems strained to the breaking point. They had come so close to losing everything. And yet, despite their victory, there was a gnawing feeling in Jake's gut that they had only just begun to understand the true depth of the threat they were facing. Admiral, Amy Sullivan's voice broke through his thoughts, bringing him back to the present. I've been analyzing the data from the weapon we destroyed. It wasn't just some rogue anomaly. There's something larger at play here. The weapon. It was designed to create instability, not just here, but across the galaxy. It was a test. Jake's brow furrowed as he turned to face her. A test? Yes, Amy continued, her voice tight with anxiety. The energy readings we detected were deliberately amplified, and the gravity anomalies were engineered to destabilize systems on a galactic scale. Whoever created that weapon, they weren't just after us. They wanted to tear apart the entire fabric of galactic order. Jake's heart sank as the implications settled over him. If this was part of something larger, if there were others out there who wanted to bring the galaxy to its knees, then their struggle was far from over. We need to know who's behind this, Jake said, his voice low and resolute. And why? Whatever they're planning, we can't let them win. Amy nodded grimly. I agree. The data we collected points to a source of energy unlike anything we've seen before. It's almost as if the weapon was a precursor, a way to destabilize regions before a larger force makes its move. Jake stared at the screen, his mind racing. The unknown had always been a part of space travel. The dangers, the mysteries, they were what drove humanity to expand. But this was something else entirely. Whoever or whatever was behind these attacks had been preparing for a long time. They had planned for humanity to be an obstacle, and now they were going to be met with a force they had never imagined. Ben, Jake said, turning to the captain standing at his side, bring us out of the anomaly's reach. I want to regroup. We need to know exactly what we're up against before we make our next move. Aye, Admiral, Ben replied, his tone grave. He wasted no time giving orders, and the Intrepid began to move away from the dying nebula, taking the rest of the fleet. With it, the ships groaned under the stress of the sudden course change, but they held together as the fleet pushed forward into safer space. Jake turned to face his officers, his mind still fixated on the destruction they had narrowly escaped. We're not alone in this fight, Jake said, his voice carrying the weight of their situation. We've made powerful enemies, and now we have to be ready for what's coming next. This galaxy doesn't know what we're capable of, but it will soon enough. Days turned into weeks as the fleet pushed forward into the uncharted territories beyond the rim. But with every passing day, the tension grew. They were moving deeper into the unknown, and despite the moments of calm, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Something was out there, something vast, something powerful. And it wasn't just the remnants of the weapon that had attacked them. There was a shadow stretching across the galaxy, one that was pulling at the very threads of reality. On the bridge of the Intrepid, the crew worked tirelessly, but even they couldn't escape the mounting sense of unease that permeated every corner of their ship. The data from the destroyed weapon was still being analyzed, but the more they uncovered, the clearer it became. Humanity was not just fighting against an external threat. They were fighting against the very fabric of galactic order, a structure that had been built on centuries of peace, but which was now crumbling under the weight of something far darker. "Admiral," Amy's voice came through again, her tone tight with urgency. "I've uncovered something in the data. There are traces of energy signatures, dark matter energy signatures spanning across multiple systems. It's not just one weapon. There are more, and they're spread across the galaxy." Jake's heart pounded. "How many more?" Amy's voice trembled as she continued. "I can't say for sure, but the energy signatures are vast. It's like they're part of a larger network. I've never seen anything like this. It's as if someone or something has been preparing for an event of galactic scale. They're spreading these weapons out, each one designed to destabilize a different part of the galaxy." Jake's mind raced. He had always known that there were threats out there, pirates, raiders, species that sought to dominate. But this was different. This wasn't just another enemy. This was a force that sought to tear apart everything. And humanity had just become its primary target. "We need to move fast," Jake said, his voice cold with determination. "Get us to the nearest system. We need to take out as many of these weapons as we can before they can launch a full-scale attack." Ben nodded, already relaying the orders too. "The fleet will move out immediately, Admiral. But we'll need to be cautious. These weapons are not like anything we've faced before. If we rush in blindly, we'll be walking straight into another trap." Jake's eyes hardened as he looked out the viewport. The stars beyond were beautiful, but they were also a reminder of how vast and unforgiving space could be. He wasn't just fighting for the survival of humanity anymore. He was fighting for the survival of the galaxy itself. "Then we won't rush in blindly," Jake said, his voice firm. "We'll hit them where they least expect it. And when we do, we'll make sure they know who's really in charge." The fleet surged forward, its engines pushing them deeper into the unknown, toward the weapons that were slowly but surely threatening to tear apart everything humanity had fought for. And somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the galaxy, the dark forces that had set this plan into motion were watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made the first move in a game that would shape the future of the galaxy. And whatever came next, humanity would face it head-on. There was no turning back. Now, the battle for the galaxy was just beginning. The galaxy was unraveling at the edges, and the Intrepid was racing toward its heart. Every second, every twist of the ship's engines felt like a countdown time was slipping away, and with it, the chance to stop the weapons from tearing the galaxy apart. Jake Morrison stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the vast expanse ahead, but his mind was far from calm. The quiet sense of urgency had grown into something far more powerful, a relentless pulse in his veins. Humanity had fought battles before, but this wasn't just another skirmish. This was the kind of fight that could redefine everything. The darkness that had been silently creeping into the galaxy was no longer just an abstract threat. It was here. It was real. And they were its target. Every system they passed, every piece of new data that flickered on the screens, confirmed it. This was bigger than just humanity's survival. This was about the survival of everything they knew. "Admiral, we've detected a massive energy spike coming from the Zorath cluster." Amy Sullivan's voice broke through his thoughts. "It's one of the dark energy signatures, but it's single quotes S. different. It's more concentrated, and I believe it's connected to one of the weapons we've been tracking. Jake's hands clenched around the rail as he listened. He had expected a lot of things from this journey: danger, uncertainty, challenges. But what they were facing now was unlike anything they had ever anticipated. These weapons weren't just random acts of destruction. They were part of a larger, coordinated plan to destabilize the entire galaxy. And whatever lay ahead, they had no choice but to confront it head-on. "We're close," Jake said, his voice steady despite the rising tide of pressure in his chest. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Get us into that cluster. If we let them establish a foothold, we'll be too late to stop them." Ben Rodriguez nodded from his command post, his fingers flying across the controls. "Understood, Admiral. All ships are aligned. We'll be in range in 5 minutes. Jake's eyes flickered over to the screen. The Zorath cluster was a mess of celestial chaos pulsars, black holes, and dying stars that had become a graveyard for ships that hadn't been able to navigate the deadly gravitational fields. But now, as they neared the cluster, it wasn't the celestial hazards that made Jake's heart race. It was the sense of purpose that clung to the unknown force behind. The weapons. Whoever was orchestrating this felt confident, too confident. And that made them dangerous. "The fleet is ready," Ben said, turning to Jake. "But we need to be careful. The gravitic forces here are strong. We'll have to keep our distance from the black holes, while still getting close enough to strike the weapons source." Jake nodded, the adrenaline beginning to surge through his veins. "Move us in, slowly." As the fleet approached, Jake's thoughts kept returning to the past weeks of tension and uncertainty. The decision to exile humanity had felt like a death sentence. The Council had expected them to fail, to collapse under the weight of their own aggression and defiance. But the deeper they pushed into the galaxy's outskirts, the clearer it became. Humanity had not been cast out to wither and die. They had been cast out to become something different, something powerful. "Admiral, we're within range," Amy said, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "I'm getting the coordinates for the weapons core. It's right in the heart of the cluster, near the largest black hole." Jake took a deep breath. "We can't hesitate. We fire everything we have, every last weapon. This is our only chance." The Intrepid surged forward, its engines roaring as they crossed into the gravitic field of the Zorath cluster. The ships behind them followed closely, the fleet now a unified force, moving with the same purpose. But the closer they got to the weapons core, the more Jake could feel the danger closing in. The gravitational forces were intensifying, making their course harder to navigate. The closer they got, the stronger the pull. "Hold steady, Ben's voice rang out. "We're almost there. On my mark." Jake's fingers drummed against the armrest, his eyes locked on the view screen. The weapon, a swirling mass of dark energy and unidentifiable machinery, loomed ahead, surrounded by the inky blackness of the black hole's event horizon. The weapon pulsed with energy, its core at the center of it all, waiting. "Now, Jake," commanded Dot in an instant. The fleet's weapons erupted in a simultaneous barrage. The stars outside turned into streaks of fire as laser beams, torpedoes, and plasma blasts streaked toward the weapon's core. The explosion that followed rocked the Intrepid, but Jake had expected it. This was their chance. The weapon had to be disrupted, the core had to be destabilized. They had no idea how strong the weapon was, how much power it could withstand, but they were betting everything on the strike. But as the explosion faded, something went terribly wrong. The weapon's surface shimmered and twisted, then to Jake's shock, the blast seemed to bend around it, absorbed by some kind of shield that had appeared at the last moment. The weapon wasn't just protecting itself, it was evolving, adapting. "We missed," Jake muttered under his breath. The shield had absorbed the energy, And now, a massive rippling shockwave erupted from the weapon's core. It shot outward, consuming everything in its path. Space itself bent and twisted as if the fabric of reality were being torn. "We need to move now," Ben shouted, urgency creeping into his voice. "We're too close." But it was too late. The shockwave hit the Intrepid first. The ship's shields flared and sputtered under the onslaught, but they couldn't hold. The pulse of dark energy slammed into them, tearing apart the shields and sending the ship into a tailspin. The crew was thrown violently as the Intrepid's systems flickered and died. Asterisk, we're losing power. The comms officer yelled. Hull integrity is compromised. We're drifting. Jake gritted his teeth, fighting to stay upright. His ship, his fleet, they had all come so far. They couldn't afford to lose this fight. They had to hold on. Ben, get us back on course. Jake shouted. We can't let them win. Not like this. The fleet was in chaos. The Intrepid's thrusters sputtered as the crew fought to regain control. Other ships in the fleet were struggling to stay in formation, but Jake's mind was locked on one thing, the weapon. It had adapted, but it wasn't invincible. They had made a dent, and they could do it again. Suddenly, another shockwave erupted, but this time it was different. It wasn't just destructive, it was pulling at the very fabric of space itself. The weapon was not just a weapon anymore. It was a force, a living thing manipulating gravity and space with terrifying precision. Admiral, Amy cried out, her voice strained with panic. We've just detected a secondary field. It's locking us in. We can't escape. The pull of the weapon grew stronger. But something in Jake's mind clicked. He wasn't about to let this be their end. They had fought too hard, come too far. There had to be a way to stop it. They couldn't just break through the shield. They had to break the weapon itself. Get me the coordinates for that core, Jake said, his voice steady. This time, we go in close. We get that core. We're not leaving until this ends. His crew worked with precision, even as the gravitational forces intensified, pulling them further into the black hole's grip. Jake stood tall, resolute, even as the universe itself seemed to bend around them. There was no more room for fear. This was it. They would win, or they would die trying. But Jake knew one thing above all else. Humanity would never stop fighting. The battle for humanity's survival had reached its breaking point. The Intrepid and its fleet were no longer fighting just for space or territory. They were fighting for their very existence, for the future of their species. The last few weeks had been a blur of chaos, weapons fire, and desperation as they pressed deeper into the heart of enemy territory. Territory that had once been the galaxy's undisputed heart of peace. Now, it was a battleground. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the viewport as the galaxy outside swirled with the growing chaos. Behind him, his crew scrambled to maintain control of the fleet, fighting against the increasing pull of the gravitational anomaly. The weapon they had discovered, far from being a single rogue piece of machinery, had turned out to be part of a much larger network, an intricate web of dark energy designed to destabilize the entire galaxy. And the entity controlling it was not some rogue faction or rebel force. It was something ancient, something far more dangerous, something that had been waiting for the galaxy to grow complacent. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides as he thought of the confrontation that awaited them. The weapon had evolved, its core defenses now stronger than ever. But they had learned something critical in the process, the true nature of their enemy. Whoever controlled this weapon, whoever had crafted this dark, destructive force, was not after simple dominance. They were after the very foundation of galactic civilization. And humanity, for better or worse, had become their prime target. Admiral, We've located the central core. Amy Sullivan's voice rang through the bridge, cutting through the tension like a knife. It's in a massive relay station, almost like a fortress surrounded by multiple layers of energy shields. The data indicates that it's the source of the weapon's power. Jake turned to face her, his expression hardening. Can we get through those shields? Amy paused for a beat, eyes scanning the data. We might be able to breach the outer layer with concentrated firepower, but the core itself, it's shielded by a secondary field that can absorb and reflect energy. We'll need to go in close, beyond the perimeter. And even then, it won't be easy. We don't have a choice, Jake said, his voice steady despite the weight of the decision. If we don't destroy that core, we'll lose everything. We'll be trapped in this galaxy, surrounded by enemies who can manipulate the very laws of Oz. Physics, and the rest of the galaxy, they'll fall without us. The fleet was already moving into position, but as Jake turned to look out the viewport, the stars ahead began to twist. Something had shifted, something he couldn't put his finger on, but he knew it instinctively. They were being watched. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they were walking into a trap. "Admiral," Rodriguez's voice interrupted, "I'm getting strange readings ahead. The anomaly's gravitational pull is intensifying. It's like something is pushing us forward. I can't shake the feeling that we're being herded." Jake's eyes narrowed. This isn't a coincidence. They know we're coming. They've been waiting for us. At this rate, Rodriguez continued, we'll be pulled into the core before we even have a chance to strike. We need to act fast. Jake's mind raced. He had known they were walking into danger, but this was something else, something more calculated, more deliberate. Their enemies weren't just anticipating their movements. They were controlling them, pushing them toward this final confrontation. Full speed ahead, Jake barked, gripping the command chair with both hands. Get us into position. No hesitation. The fleet surged forward, but as they neared the core, the pull of the anomaly grew stronger. Space itself seemed to twist and bend around them, warping in ways that defied understanding. Stars became streaks of light as their ships fought against the gravitational forces. The gravitational waves that had once been a minor obstacle now seemed like a living, breathing thing, manipulating the very fabric of space to force them closer to the heart of the weapon. "Shields are failing," the communications officer shouted. "We can't hold out much longer." Jake's gaze remained fixed ahead, his mind sharp and focused. "Hold steady. We're almost there." The fleet moved like a single, coordinated unit, pushing forward through the increasingly violent forces. As they neared the heart of the weapons fortress, Jake's comms officer spoke again, but this time the words sent a chill through his spine. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the core," the officer said, voice trembling. "It's a message." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had been expecting this. They had been waiting for a response from their enemies. But what could they possibly say now, when humanity had already pressed this far into their territory? "Put it through," Jake said, his voice low. The screen flickered, and then a figure appeared. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were twisted and alien, its eyes black and empty. Its skin stretched tight over its face. It spoke with a voice that was both mechanical and organic, a cold, artificial tone that seemed to reverberate through the very air. "You should not have come here, Admiral Morrison," the figure said, its voice filled with a chilling, almost predatory calm. "You and your species have been nothing but a nuisance. But now you have crossed a line. You have made yourselves a target in a war you cannot understand." Jake's jaw tightened as he stood, meeting the figure's cold, unblinking gaze on the screen. "We understand enough. You've been manipulating this galaxy, controlling everything from the shadows. But it ends now." The figure tilted its head slightly, almost in amusement. You still do not understand. You are but a tool and instrument. In a much larger game, your defiance has only accelerated the inevitable. The power you seek to destroy is beyond your comprehension, and your fate has already been decided. Before Jake could respond, the transmission cut off, leaving only a cold silence in its wake. The weapon had spoken, but its words were nothing more than a final taunt. They were not the first to face this enemy, and they wouldn't be the last. The figure's confidence, its chilling calmness, was a reminder that this was more than just a weapon. It was a harbinger of something far worse. "We've got no time to waste," Jake said, his voice low but steady. "Prepare for assault. Focus everything we have on that core. We end this now." The fleet moved into position, the weapons primed and ready. The gravitational forces intensified. Again, but this time, Jake didn't flinch. He had led humanity through countless battles, and now, more than ever, he knew that they had one shot. "Fire everything," he commanded. The fleet's weapons opened up in a devastating barrage. But as the first wave of energy slammed into the weapon's core, the reaction was immediate and violent. The core's defenses flared to life, energy. Beams shooting out from the heart of the structure, striking the ships in a barrage of energy. The fleet's shields held for a moment, but Jake could feel the power of the force behind each strike. This wasn't just a fight. It was a test of willpower, a battle for everything they had fought for. "Admiral, the shields can't hold." Amy's voice screamed through the comms. "We're taking too much damage." Jake's mind raced. They were too close to turn back. But this was the moment that would decide everything. They had no more time, no more options. "We keep fighting," Jake said, his voice fierce. "Humanity doesn't back down. We will not let this galaxy fall." The battle raged on, the ship bucking under the force of the weapon's retaliation. The fleet was outmatched, outnumbered, but not outclassed. Jake's hand remained steady as he issued commands, directing the fleet, coordinating their attacks, refusing to give in to the pull of the unknown. As the final strike approached, he knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened next, humanity had become something the galaxy had never expected. And that, in the end, would be their salvation. Asterisk.